The key to getting in, getting out, and getting on with it is figuring out how you want to start and then just starting. And we're going to start with color this time around with this first exercise. So I like to start by gathering together the objects which I'm going to use and playing around with them until I feel like I have something that gives me enough visual information to start. And then I take my prepared paper and I make a simple note of a color that represents that shape of color that I was looking at. So I started with a cobalt blue or an ultramarine blue for my blue vase, and then I knocked in a green for the green vase that it's in front of, and then another green vase, and then just moving from one color shape to the next color shape. And the biggest color shapes in this particular still life are the sort of neutral background paper that was kind of a tan, and then the foreground lighter fabric, my drop cloth, which the still life is sitting on top of. And then I have kind of my greens and blue and red and yellow and orange that are playing around together in the center of the composition. And I'm beginning just with looking and recording the color as I'm best able to sort of express it first go. And I don't spend a lot of time on the first one. I think to myself, well, you've got to start somewhere. So you start, and then you make a note to yourself as you're beginning. Perhaps that blue is too dark. It's not reading as vibrantly as what I'm seeing. So perhaps next time when I do my second and then my third and fourth attempt, I might mix up something which is closer to what I see. So when you're mixing color, you're always adjusting it to make it darker or lighter, brighter or duller. And here I'm mixing up some of the colors that I'm going to use for my second attempt. I'm starting with yellow and red to make orange and adding in white to lighten that orange, and white also dulls, so it will lighten and dull at the same time. And because I'm going for a color that is approximate to the brown paper bag that is the backdrop, I really do want to dull it out. It's maybe closest to orange of all the colors, but it's a pretty dull version of it. So I add a little burnt umber to continue that dulling process, neutralizing the color, and I add in a bit more white to bring the value of that color to the place where it seems the most appropriate to me, a kind of a tan, light tan. And I'm going to prepare on my palette most of the colors that I want to work with. I'm going to mix up a blue mixed with some white that will allow that really dark ultramarine blue to show the breadth of the range it has, from the darkest blue where it's just the pure ultramarine to a very light blue that might be the blue in reflection, just adding white, and then creating a little neutral blue by simply adding in some of that tan. And I'm leaving that dark blue, mid blue, neutral blue sitting there waiting for me to use it. And now I'm moving on and I'm mixing up another color, a color that I'm observing on my still life. And I'm leaving all of these to sort of play together on my palette so I can see how they are looking together on my palette before I even touch my paper with them, coming up with some mixes of greens for my vase and creating those varieties of possibilities on my palette before I even take them to the paper. And when I've got my palette of paint mixed to my liking, I'm going to go back into my painting. I've toned it with a little thin yellow, so there's no white left to peek through any of those forms. And I'm going to paint a larger version, again thinking about color and the shape that that color embodies in my still life. And I start with that blue cobalt vase. I move on to that green vase directly behind it to the left. And I'm not looking at a lot of the variations in texture, the variations in light reflectivity or cast shadow. I'm really looking at the generalized flat color that these three vases contain, going from a blue to that warm green on the left to a cooler green on the right, and then bringing in the other colors, the colors of that neutralized orange or tan background color. And I'm mixing up my paint fairly thickly, adding a little liquid to the oil paint to make it spread more easily. If I were using acrylic, I would be adding acrylic medium, just a matte medium, that would extend the color and let it flow more easily across the page. And then just knocking in that shape. I just painted that tan background shape that is the negative shape that tucks in and around all of these other objects. And now I'm returning to painting the positive shapes, those shapes of the things that I'm actually looking at. So I began with positive shapes, the blue and the green and the cooler green. I went to the negative background shape, came forward again to those fruit shapes and colors. And in putting those shapes down, I really noticed the shapes of the colors of their shadows, and I laid those darker shapes in. And I continue to look at shape and color in relation to what I've already begun. And I move back and forth between the positive and the negative, the shadow shape and the shape of the actual thing. And I look at how different is this foreground neutral color from that background neutral color. And in progressing across this small 5-inch by 7-inch rectangle of color, after 5, 6, 7 minutes, I end up with something that is a approximation of what I'm seeing. And each time I do it, I get a little closer, and I get a little closer to seeing what is there and expressing in those choices a representation of the still life. That's what happens when you get in and you get out and you get on with it. You get better.